Out of the box, component instances aren't unique. Messages get sent to and from components to all of their instances. But what if we want a component to behave uniquely? Now, out of the box, ProtoPie doesn't have a built-in mechanism to do this, so we're going to have to custom roll our own. And to explore this, we're going to use the humble radio button. Okay, to follow along, open up the 07 unique component start file. Okay, so the first thing we need to do is to set up the unique identifier. So we need a way for our radio button to be uniquely identified from all of the other instances. Okay, so first off, we're going to come over to our layers panel and we're going to find one of our radio button graphics. These are just graphics at this point. So I'm going to open up, actually, if we just start from the beginning here. So we've got this form group, just going to open it up. You want to go into panel radio set, row item 1, and we're going to find this radio group here. Okay, so we're going to make that a component and we're going to open up the component here in the local components panel. So this is our kind of root component. I'm just going to rename this, just giving it a capital R. I like all my components to start with capital letters. Okay, first thing we need to do is we're going to set up some variables. So let's go to the variables panel and we're going to set up 2 variables. So I'm just going to add 2 here. Both of them are going to be text variables. So we're just going to shift select them, choose text, and we're going to rename them. So variable 1 is going to be called name. And variable 2 is going to be called radio underscore group. As you hopefully know, radios exist in groups, and this is how a radio knows to be able to toggle on or off depending on which item in the group is selected. So we need these 2 things to kind of make that work. Okay, so we're going to set some default values in here. So we're going to come to the name variable. We're going to put in a name of radio 1. And for radio group, we're just going to put in a name of group 1. Just a little gotcha here. When you're naming things, make sure you don't press the return key. So effectively, if you do that, you've added a return break and it can mess with matching the names. Okay, so just make sure there's no invisible characters in there. Okay, so we're going to move into the interaction panel and I'm going to add a tap trigger. And I'm going to target the radio layer. So that's the root layer of our component here. And inside of this, I'm going to add a send response. I'm going to leave the channel as center current scene. And I'm going to type a message in here and the message is going to be radio selected. And again, I'm going to use camel case for this. Now I want to send the value name. So the name is going to be our unique name of our specific instance. So I'm going to check the send value together and I'm going to open up my formulas panel and I'm just going to find the name variable. Just going to add that in there. Okay, we need to also send the radio group name. So I'm going to add another send response. Again, leaving it as center current scene. This message is going to be group selected. So that's the message we're going to send out. And again, I need to send the value from the other variable, which is the radio group variable. And I'm going to click OK. Okay, so we're sending these 2 values out when we tap on this particular component. Now I want to be able to override these. I want to be able to make these names unique. So I need to come to the variables panel again. I'm just going to shift select both of them and I'm just going to check make overridable. So they're now both overridable inside our properties panel. Okay, so next up, we need a way of comparing our unique names to a selected value. And if you think about it, we're really asking this question. Is the radio that has been selected this radio? Now we just need to convert that into the language of ProtoPie. Okay, so we're going to add a couple more variables. So let's come down to the variables panel and add a couple more. Let's make this panel a little bit bigger. So both of these are going to be text variables again. So we're just going to shift select them and choose text. And we're going to come in and give them some names. So we're going to call the first one selected name. And the second one's going to be called selected group. Next up, let's come over to the triggers panel and we're going to add a receive trigger. We're going to leave the channel as receive from current scene, and we're going to come into our messages and we're going to choose the message radio selected. Let's check the assign to variable box, and in the drop down we're going to choose selected name, so that variable we just created. Okay, next up, let's add another receive trigger. Again, leaving receive from current scene, and we're going to choose this time group selected. Check our assign to variable box and select our selected group variable. Okay, so now we've created a way of identifying each instance uniquely. We can set about creating the toggle behavior. Okay, so let's come to our triggers panel and we're going to add a detect trigger. We're going to choose the selected name variable. Okay, within this detect trigger, we're going to add a condition. And in the first drop down, we're going to choose, again, the selected name variable. So we want to compare this selected name against the overridden name variable. So we're going to choose that in the second box. So we're going to come to this 1a value and we're going to find our name variable and choose that. Okay, so now you can see that we're now comparing to see if the selected name is equal to the name. Okay, so because we're creating a radio group, we also need to check that the group value matches as well. And to check more than one condition, we need to add a subcondition. So I'm going to hit this plus button. We've created a new condition, so a subcondition, and we're going to do the same thing with the two group variables. So we're going to select the selected group, and we're going to leave the equality at equals, and we're going to come into this second box and we're going to choose the radio group. Okay, so next, let's set up the interaction behavior of the toggle. Okay, so inside our condition, let's add an opacity. And we're going to name this layer just to make it a little bit clearer. We're going to call this show selected. And it's always good to name your layers, especially in the interaction panel, just to make sure it's clear what's going on. Okay, show selected. Okay, so we're going to choose the selected layer. So this is the layer that is basically the dot inside of the radio. And we're going to set the opacity to 100. And we're going to make the duration 0. We don't want any animation on this. Okay, next up we're going to duplicate the condition. And we're just going to do the reverse condition. Obviously, when radios work within a radio group, when you select one radio, it needs to deselect the previous radio. So that's kind of what this is doing. So within this condition, we just need to change the equality of this first subcondition. So not this group one, because remember that radios exist as part of a group, of the same group. So it's just the name that's unique that we're changing. So let's change this equality from equals to not equals. And if that's so, we just need to change this label here. We're going to say hide selected. And we're going to turn the opacity down to 0. Okay, so that's all we need to do in the component. Let's go back to the scene and update the instances. Okay, so the first thing we need to do here is replace the graphic layers with 2 more instances. A quick trick I use here is to temporarily make the layers components so that I can use the swap feature. This saves having to mess around with the positioning. Okay, so let's come to our layers panel. We're going to find and open up row item 2. And we can see we've got our radio graphic layer here. Let's just make that a component. And we're going to do the same for row 3. Then we can come back to row 2 and we're going to come over to the component drop down here and we're going to choose our radio component. So that's the one with the capital R. And we're going to do the same for radio 3. Okay, cool. We can now safely delete these 2 temporary components. Okay, so next up we need to give our new instances their unique names. So let's go to radio 2, change the name to radio 2. We leave the group name as it is. Remember, these are all part of the same group. Next, let's come to radio 3 and rename its unique name to radio 3. Okay, so that's all we should need to do to make this work. So let's open up Preview and give it a test. So we're going to select apples, bananas, and you can see as soon as we select the second one, it has now deselected the first one. And there you go, a working radio set component. Okay, so this technique of creating unique components can obviously be applied to any component that you might create. Okay, so this completes this lesson, and I'll see you in the next one.